Hello, this is Dr. David Pomeroy, the host of ADHD Focus. I'm glad you found us again, and we've got an exciting show today about a new paradigm and way of looking at ADHD and how, not just how we think, but letting the world know how it works. My guest today is Jeff Copper, who's an ADHD coach, and I would say also a very creative thinker in the ADHD perspective of the world. He's certified by the International Coaching Federation and the Professional Association of ADHD Coaches. His programs are on Attention Talk Radio, Attention Talk Video, and also at digcoaching.com. And he founded his Dig Coaching practice in 2007 to help clients dig through the issues, and his clients have the aha moment, then they have a different perspective and answer. And Jeff himself has had many aha moments as he's created his cognitive ergonomics. So Jeff, thanks for being here. It's great to have you on the show.
I'm so grateful to be on the show again, and incredibly grateful that you're allowing me to talk about this. There's some kind of crazy stuff that's going on, and it's pretty cutting edge, and the opportunities to talk to people and explain what I got going on and have them judge it on its own merit is a great opportunity. So I've always considered you a thought leader, and I appreciate you having me on.
Great. And that's a mutual consideration. So tell us about how you arrived at this. What was the string of things that got you to, oh, this is cognitive ergonomics?
Oh, wow. Okay. So I have dyslexia and a learning disability and ADD, and writing's difficult to me. So I started my podcast in 2010 and have interviewed experts every week ever since. And I did it because writing's difficult. I never dreamed I would get an amazing education by interviewing all the experts. And early on, I interviewed Dr. Russell Barkley, and in 2010, 2011, he was looking at ADHD. And if you had ADHD and you took an executive functioning impairment test, ADHD wouldn't show up as an impairment. And he's like, this doesn't make any sense. And I remember at a conference, he argued from 7 completely different scientific perspectives that would generalize ADHD is in the prefrontal cortex. That's where executive functions are. It had to be this. And so he said, either it wasn't or the tests were wrong. So what he did was he started taking a look at the test, but more specifically, he started to look at the definitions of what were executive functions. And I remember him saying there was like 32 to 34 different definitions in the literature. As he said, it was a dog's breakfast, and like anything goes. And he's like, you can't do anything with anything unless you have precise definitions of what is and is not an executive function. So he set out to define it. And he said, where do you start on something like that? And the consensus was that self-regulation was definitely an executive function. So he started there. And so he defined a collection of executive functions and I like the way he decided ADHD is a collection of executive functions are a collection of mind tools that you use to solve problems. And there's 6 of them. And when you think of it as a collection of mind tools, I got a bunch of tools in my garage and I use those tools to build something. Well, in your mind, you use these tools to solve problems. And we'll talk about like planning and managing time, how they're related to that. And so once he had that definition, I was like curious, like this really made a lot of sense. And I remember I was in the audience sitting next to a psychiatrist, Dr. Charles Parker. He looked at me and I looked at him. I go, this is brilliant. I didn't know what to do with it. So I interviewed Dr. Barkley several times. And then I really started to study his model and really started studying his model and really started to kind of break it down with my clients. And I was lucky enough to play around with different ideas. And I began to realize that when you're dealing with something that's intangible, you got to make it tangible. Like it's too nebulous.
You have to be able to see it, work with it.
And so I stumbled into, it's kind of a longer story how I got there, but I started coming up with experiences that I could put people in where I could bring tangibility to the executive functions. And so you and I talked about one of them, and this is, if I were to have you prepare a meal and eat a meal and then clean a meal up using your less dominant hand, okay? Now, most people, when they do that experience, they come out and go, oh my God, that was frustrating and that was awkward or kind of whatever. But I go, well, wait a second. Dr. Barkley talks about your brain being a two-level system. There's your automatic brain and there's your executive functioning brain. And I'm using your less dominant hand as a means to mirror this. So your dominant hand is your automatic brain. So in this experience, when you have to do this, if you're going to do it, you have to be on guard. Well, that's what self-awareness is, being on guard every second.
You've got
You'll
to
get
be
frustrated.
thinking in the moment right there.
And you'll get frustrated. You got to calm yourself down and keep going. Well, that's an executive function. You've got to restrain yourself and not use your dominant hand. Anyway, I go with people all the way through this and I go, yeah, that's what they are. So I ended up putting together a collection of these, and I patent or trademark the term attention scope, like a microscope or a telescope or a stethoscope or an MRI or a CAT scan. The scope is really a means to see, but the simulations are the best I could do to put people in to bring tangibility to what they are. And so with this idea of Dr. Barkley's definition, and by the way, in medical world, you had to have germ theory that understands what bacteria is and viruses are. That's a theory, but you had to have a microscope to see it. So in any field of engineering, you got to have some model that explains stuff in a way to see it. So his model was defining it, and attention scope was a way to see it. So all I did is package it together along the lines of engineering, because systems engineering is about building systems and processes and being organized. It's been around for a while. Ergonomics is a subfield about fitting the job to the user. So it's like you have adjustable desks and chairs. In fact, I'm at a stand-up desk where I can move it and all that kind of stuff. But in the cognitive world, it's really pretty primitive. So all I did was piggyback on what was already there. So cognitive ergonomics is a field that exists, but I call mine cognitive ergonomics from the inside out, because by bringing tangibility to this, I can help a person understand it and then begin to advocate what do they need in order to help them perform in the job. And so this is a lot of people's brains are kind of blowing up because I'm using lots of really kind of fancy words and stuff, but really what it is, it's a new way to look at ADHD without all the subjectivity and all the emotion, and look at what's really going on in order to sit down and identify the problem. And no longer we're departing from behavioral training to what accommodations can we provide so the person can accomplish the goal naturally. Make sense?
And think yes, think in the way our ADHD minds do, instead of trying it to bend it into, okay, we'll make sure you don't have distractions and you can wear noise canceling headphones and we'll give you a desk in the corner. And I think you said accommodating, so we can try harder, but in a different way. Try harder to think the way everybody else in the company or the situation. And instead of having the company say, oh, if this is the way your brain works, let's help it work that way better.
Yes. This is a foreign idea, because I'm calling this a paradigm. A paradigm is a change in how we conceptually understand something. And people like things that are different, but they don't like to be wrong. And we're going to talk about some really cool stuff in a little bit that kind of flies in the face of prior knowledge, but it's really kind of exciting. So I kind of like the analogy, Dr. Plumway, of my eyesight is impaired, right? Now, you can see my glasses, but if I take my glasses off and I'm trying to read, I'm having a hard time to focus because of the impairment. So if I'm trying to read in a room with a bunch of other people and I'm trying really hard to focus, and I can't do this. And I'm feeling the pressure. All I want to do is get away from the situation because I'm not performing, and everybody else can do it. And all of a sudden I'm getting some anxiety. I'm getting all depressed because I don't know why I can't perform. Well, metaphorically, we're going to talk a little bit about ADHD and executive functions without the accommodations, metaphorically, is you're just sitting there trying to read without the reading. You can, like, it's going to create anxiety. It's going to keep some difficulty.
Yeah,
If you have
because
the
you can't
accommodations,
then.
then and a disorder, like attention deficit disorder, a disorder is a condition. An impairment is the condition. A disability is how that impairment shows up in everyday life. If you can get the accommodation, you can mitigate or eliminate the disability. So the way we're looking at this is no longer that it's a challenge. If we can just give people the right support, then we can enable them to focus, right, in a way that's natural without just kind of grunting their way out. So again, people's heads kind of going crazy, but it's exciting because it's a new way. It's kind of like, wow, the world is actually round, not flat, or we rotate around the sun, not it rotates around us. It's at that level of stuff. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, and I think it definitely is looking at the way an ADHD brain works. And there's convergent thinking. You've got an idea, and okay, I'm looking for the answer. And divergent thinking, where there's a question, oh, there's this idea and this one and this one and this one. But then, oh, thinking of this idea, well, that kind of relates to this one. And it's associative thinking, associate one thing to another. And I know I do it, but I can't explain the whole route. So people say, well, how'd you get there? And I'm thinking, well, I'm not quite sure. I thought of this and this, and then those two. But that's exactly what I'm doing. But if I can talk through that with another person, I may get other ideas from something they say. And I think of it as like jazz. One player in a trio will come up with a certain phrase, and one of the others thinks, boy, if I invert that and I could do, because they're thinking music terms, they come up with something based on that phrase, but it's different. Well, then the other guy may think, oh, that's kind of cool. And so they're riffing off of each other's ideas, and they may arrive somewhere that neither of them could have thought consciously how to get there.
100%. So it's kind of fun because I'd like to kind of jump to something that we've done, kind of like an end, and then kind of work our way backwards. Because so far, a lot of people are probably like a deer in the headlights, like, what's this all about? And so this program that I've been doing, I've trained about 100 people in on it. And what in the world of science, a lot of times you try to use theorems and proofs and all kinds of stuff. You're basically trying to, if A equals B and B equals C, then A must equal C. We call them axiom. So you take a truth or a bunch of truths and you build a truth out of it. And so I want to walk through what we're excited about that the model has actually produced. Talk about how we got there, talk about how it shows up in the real world, and then kind of work our way backwards. So our model has produced the following. Again, this is just a bunch of truths. ADHD is an executive function impairment. According to Dr. Barkley, executive functions are a collection of mind tools that we use, right, for goal-directed behavior over time to solve problems, right? Really to solve problems.
This is where we can do. I think this fits into that visual you have of.
Yep. And I'm gonna kind of go through that and then walk back to that visual, because that's where people get kind of because we got to come up with that. So if executive functions are there to solve problems, the characteristics of them are they're multifaceted and ambiguous. Like planning, it's multifaceted and ambiguous. Managing time, making decisions, organizing. Like, so if we begin to understand that, it makes all the sense in the world why people with ADHD, if you have it, I'm going to call it a problem-solving impairment in mind. If you have an impairment, you would have a harder time doing that compared to everybody else. And that's, again, we're just walking through the deduction to bring credibility. But here's the really cool part, okay? The leading views of cognitive science, for the most part, agree that language evolved as a tool to coordinate social behavior and solve shared problems. Like, in other words, oversimplifying, if we didn't have problems, we would have never had a need for language and we wouldn't have it. And so in that context, when you think about it, direct communication, when we first had language, we weren't writing down, we were having, like, we were working together face to face, going back and forth in order to solve problems. And so when you think about it, the most basic form is direct human interaction. So if that's the case, wait a second, having direct communication with somebody would make some sense. Neurotypicals have been doing it since language has been born. People with ADHD has been doing it. However, because of the impairment, those with ADHD need it significantly more than people that don't have it. And so what we're driving at is having the ability to sit down and talk to somebody about what your day looks like. Shouldn't be a nicety. It should be an accommodation that your employer would provide to help you organize your day. This is a titanic shift in how we're looking at it. But when you think about it, what I'm saying is, and I love this phrase, this is an accommodation that's been around for thousands of years since language was invented, but it's been hidden in plain sight.
Yes.
Hidden in plain sight. Because nobody's ever been able to define executive functions in a way that we could actually point to this. And so everybody, this was just a moment for me. I reached out to Dr. Pomeroy about this earlier, and honestly, everybody's like, oh, what's that kind of going on? And we started talking about this. And I almost let you tell the story, because between us talking about it, you had an individual that was going to work and they were talking about accommodations. And you said, well, are they enabling you to, like, talk to people? And they said, well, we call that rubber ducking. And, it was fun to hear you, because you were able to see it's hidden in plain sight. It's been going on for a long time. Nobody thinks of an accommodation, but in that field, that's exactly what we're talking about.
And this was someone in engineering, and he said the concept came from, you're talking to literally a rubber duck in order to explain your idea. And it grew into, he said, I'll go in and ask them, can we rubber duck this for a while? And both of us know that means let's have a conversation about this, because I'm trying to figure it out. And there it is. And so your system looks at, let's recognize that as something that is essential to someone with ADHD being able to solve the problem.
Yeah. And this is, I'm going to explain this. It's going to be very difficult for us to do, but solving problems for people with ADHD, the impairment is when you're really doing it in mind. If you're doing it out of mind, you're okay. So when you're rubber ducking with somebody else, that's good. You can perform more or less just like a neurotypical. The issue is really when we kind of get in mind. We're going to talk about that in a little bit, but I'd like to kind of give you a coaching example. It's kind of a funny example, but hopefully I can illustrate how this kind of plays out. I was coaching a guy one time, and early on he said, I need to send my mother a Mother's Day card. Now, sending your mother a Mother's Day on a to-do list, that's a goal. Okay. And we've heard people with ADHD, they know what to do. They have a hard time doing what they know to do. Now, in developing this model, knowing that he's got a problem solved and he stated the goal, I quickly said, I didn't let it go. I said, really, where are you going to get a card? And he said, I don't know, a store. Now, what I want you to notice is he didn't really think about that. He just said store. That's a generic answer. I said, really, what store? He goes, oh, I guess Hallmark. Now, when he had and he had to go Hallmark, I asked him a question. I'm cueing him, like, you need to figure out what store. He goes, Hallmark. I said, okay, when are you going to go by the Hallmark store? Oh, I don't really go that direction. Okay, well, how far away is the Hallmark store? It's about 10 minutes. I said, oh, so it's about a 25-minute round trip. He goes, yeah. I go, when do you have 25 minutes to go out of your way? Now, what's important here, Dr. Pomeroy, is he had said, I need to get a Mother's Day card. That's a goal. by asking him the questions, what I'm doing is I'm cueing him. What store? As I ask
Yep.
these
To think
questions,
it through.
it's helping him retrieve the knowledge and realize what he thought was really, really easy is really got to go out of his way. This is the process of problem solving. Had I not asked the questions, he would have just put it on his list and never really did it. So in this moment, I'm demonstrating how I was asking him questions as an accommodation to make it easier for him to think. We're not sitting down with a planner, and we're not a plan and all that stuff.
Right.
Literally, I'm asking the questions to help him retrieve the idea of how he's going to get this card. That is a simple example of what this really looks like. Make sense?
And I think that particularly helps with some people call it a time warp, the time distortion of, oh yeah, I'm just going to stop by and get a card. And that should take a few minutes, and not thinking, oh yes, I've got to drive there. Then I've got to find a place to park. Then I go in, then I have to look at the different cards and make a decision about them. And there's a line of 4 people at the clerk. And then so it's really going to take half an hour and not the few minutes I thought. And so it is thinking through that process.
And you so spectacularly describe that, because a lot of people look at time. I'm late, so I'm time blind. People don't realize time is not a time issue. It's a thinking issue. And what you did so well is you start, well, there's this, and I got to add this, and I got to add this, and I got to add this. When you can get like clocks and stuff, they don't add all that stuff for you. They help you think, but they don't actually do the thinking for you. And so what you just described shows how effortful it is for people to think. And again, you go back to my eyeglass thing. When I said, when I'm trying to read and I can't, I get frustrated. All I want to do is escape. When you're having to think at that level and so hard, all you want to do is escape. So I agree, it looks like a focus issue, but the root cause is, if we got to make problem solving easier, because a lot of times you're actually escaping what you're doing to get out of the pain of the thinking part.
Yeah.
Pretty intense.
Yeah. And it can seem like, oh, that's going to take me too long, or I really don't like writing an email telling someone I disagree. And so there's the perceived emotional effort, the perceived time it's going to take. And again, kind of going in reverse. Oh, that's going to take me so long to pick up this room. Well, you know what? You probably could just pick up the socks. You ask a kid to clean his room, and they're thinking, how can I do that? It's talking it through. Just pick up your socks. Okay.
So if I may, people look at cleaning a room as easy. And I tell people, no, it's not. It's a lot harder. So like, particularly if you're going to declutter, am I going to keep this or get rid of it? Well, 10% of the time, it's just clearly trash. And other times you use it every day. The 80% now, you got to say, okay, what do I do with it? Now, here's the interesting part. If you're going to keep it, where's its home going to be? This is a true story. I'm coaching a guy. He lives in Manhattan, hardly has a kitchen, and it's full. And one day I call him up and like, hey, how your birthday this weekend? Yeah, I got a waffle maker. And literally I said, where the hell are you going to put that? Like, I already knew his kitchen wasn't. I mean, I'm not coaching him. We're just having a couch. He goes, I don't know. I guess I'll put it under bed. So about 2 years after we stopped coaching, I get an email from him. Hey, guess what? I found my waffle maker. Here's the point. He put it under his bed, but logically, you wouldn't think of going to find a waffle maker under your bed. So when you're trying to declutter, people don't realize it's where it is, because that's kind of where its home is. If it's going to be somewhere else, that requires you to problem solve. Where am I going to put it where I'm going to remember to get it? And again,
exactly
this, and if you are going to there's a whole nother thing when you sell, but my point really is, this is more of a problem solving process than people think. They think you just throw it away. Well, no, there's a lot of decisions that, that is multifaceted and ambiguous again, which is why they put it off, right?
And if I'm going on a trip and I think, okay, I don't want, well, even better example, I had a specific picture of the Benedict Arnold house with my great-great-grandfather standing in front of it. And I want to kind of establish the historical significance of a table I had. I know the picture had been on a bookcase, and I thought I need to keep it somewhere so it doesn't fall off, right? Don't knock it off. And last week, where is that? And I thought maybe I put it sideways between books. I looked at every book. Maybe I put it in this bookcase. Well, maybe I put it, I was putting it somewhere safe, which is the best way to never find it again. Last night I was looking on, okay, oh, in this corner, there's another picture I had put there. Behind it was the one I needed. So I kept thinking I'm in front of the bookcase. I know it put it somewhere close to the bookcase. I didn't put it in a different room. And sure enough, it was next to the bookcase on the floor,
So
standing up. But
you're
I
using.
didn't tell myself at the time, and this is where I think the verbalization, if I said in words out loud to myself,
Yep.
you're putting this picture here so it will be safe and not get knocked off the bookcase, probably would have
Would have helped.
remembered where I put it
Would
instead
have
of
helped.
for a week turning everything upside down.
So the again, everybody, I know your head is spinning on this because this is a new paradigm, but one of the things we want to do, in preparing this is, I believe Dr. Pomeroy, in the description of the show, there's a link with a PDF. We can see it. You can't. If you can't pull this thing up, and this is there's a table that I want to talk about a little bit, and it's really designed to put thinking into a context, because again, with Dr. Barkley had to have specific definitions of executive function, and that they're used to problem solve. So if I'm going to help people understand what we're talking about here, we have to understand thinking. And the table is designed to say, you're bombarded with thoughts. I mean, they're coming all over the place, and really, you're really powerless to really fight them. However, you do get to choose which thoughts you pay attention to. But what I really want to say is, we use thoughts when we think, but there's different kinds of thinking. Like, we use thoughts when we daydream. And understand that when you daydream, it's a passive activity, and there's really not a goal. It really doesn't take any energy. In fact, worrying is a passive activity with no goal. I would actually argue both of those are just really easy to do, almost automatic. In fact, not worrying is hard, like stopping that. The point really is you have lots of thoughts in those areas. Well, I'm not talking about that. Then you have thoughts where you're using them to jump to conclusions.
This is within your table, right? So
Yes,
let's look at the
absolutely.
table and talk it as we go through.
Yeah. So
Because
when you,
I need the visual as
yeah,
we're talking
I'm
about
pulling it
this.
for you right now. So again, if when you're watching this table, you're moving from one end to the left in the table to the right. And so far, again, reaction, we're talking about daydreaming and worrying is just a really passive activity. When you're forming an opinion, a belief, you're actually jumping to conclusion. Like, you can just say that person's a jerk and not really have to substantiate it, right? You can think at some level, but really, when people say, I feel, you're not really analytically looking at the situation. You're just going with something from the past and jumping to a conclusion. And my point really is we can do that. And your feelings are sometimes right, but often they're wrong more than you think, but it doesn't really
You're just
require
going
much
with
mental
feeling.
effort. Yeah. So then on the table, we're moving into learning. And learning is really digesting discrete pieces of known information. We already know it, like learning the Pythagorean theorem. Really, you're going there and you're just trying to learn it. You might have to plug numbers into the formulas, but you don't have to apply it yet. And I'll get back to that. But this requires a little bit more effort. All right. But it's not ridiculously bad. Contemplative thinking is now going a step further. You're looking at data, and you're trying to come up with a hypothesis or seeing some analysis in trend or something like that. Now, really what I'd like you to understand at this point in time, everything that I've covered, people spend a lot of time in the daydreaming and worrying. They spend a lot of time in the judging and the emoting, and sometimes in learning. So when you think about all the time of the day where you have all of these thoughts, right? I'm not talking about what we've just covered. I'm talking where you're sitting down and you're trying to solve a problem. For example, whenever you've got to write, let's say a letter to somebody or an email, and you've got to confront them, you've got to persuade them, you've got to basically write such a way that they're going to change their mind. Okay, now you got a problem. So the idea is, what of 50 ideas that I have floating in my mind am I going to choose? What words am I going to come up with
What
that's going to
angle I'm going to
articulate
put on
one?
it.
And what's
Mhm.
the order of those that I'm going to do sufficient that I'm going to get this person to change your mind? That's problem solving. That's where the ADHD impairment's kind of coming in. Saying, hey, you're going to get a Mother's Day card, stopping and going, what store, how far away, when I can do that. That's what I'm talking about. And so the point of this is when you think I need to do this and I need to do that and I need to do this and I need to do that, you're not problem solving. You're just listing the stuff that you need to do.
Right.
The
Instead of
issue,
employing the knowledge you have, this is how far it is away.
yep,
Okay, now you're thinking it through, you're processing
exactly.
it.
Exactly. And, Dr. Pomeroy, one of the things that's really interesting, you think about it, if you're having a hard time in school or you're having a hard time in life, what do? You go talk to a teacher, you go talk to a
Hmm.
tutor, you go talk to a therapist. One level, they come talk to you, or they go to a coach, or you go to a friend. Like, do you notice what's in common of all these? There's direct communications to go help you solve
Hmm.
these problems. And so the whole point of this is a lot of times people get lost in the thinking. Again, retrieving the knowledge is something that you need to do, is not what we're talking about. It's actually the execution of realizing you got to go out of your way to get that Mother's Day card. And a lot of people with ADHD, they have lists and lists and lists. They don't do them. And so
Hmm.
I got kind of cocky a couple of years ago. People will call me up and say they want coaching. I'll say, I don't even have to see your to-do list. I can probably guarantee you that 80% of everything you're putting off at some level is rooted in ambiguity. And they're like, what? I go, yeah. Have you ever noticed the correlation between uncertainty and avoidance? Wow. Have
Hmm.
you ever noticed the
Yep.
correlation between clarity and motivation? If you know what to do and it's not boring, there's a caveat there, then you kind of do it. So people come to me in coaching like, I need momentum. No, 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 you don't need momentum. You need clarity. If you have clarity, you'll do it. And if you do it, you actually have momentum. And so, again, we talked about this new model. We talked about, as we're beginning to understand it, particularly from the link, the PDF, it's really more of a problem solving impairment when done in mind. And because it's so hard, there's an emotional urge to go to escape to something cognitively
Do
more
something
difficult.
else.
Yeah. And so,
And in some of that, I'm going to break in here that the applying the knowledge and working it through and how you're going to do that gets back to Dr. Barkley's kind of
yes,
crystallization of ADHD isn't knowing what to do, because we
it's
know that, but doing what
doing
we
it.
know. And that's the part that doesn't
Exactly. We're
doesn't occur
eliminating.
to.
So, years ago, Dr. Thomas Brown, when he was at Yale, now he's at UCLA, made this statement. I think it was in 2014. I heard it: as the need for independent work increases, ADHD productivity decreases. And I'm like, there's something to
Hmm.
that. Annie
Yep.
Rogers at Attitude Magazine was in one of their newsletters. She said ADHD is amplified or muted based on the environment.
Yep. And
So,
people who I'm talking to a number of people up here in the Seattle area, kind of ground zero for tech, and they've been laid off. And one of the things I tell them, yes, when you're at work, there was a structure when you had to be there, where you're going to be, which desk, and then you had meetings. There was a structure you were following. Now you wake up and there's no structure to your day. So the
well,
first thing I want you to do is, yes, I am going to have breakfast, then I'm going to go for a walk, then I'm going to work. You're going to sit down, and from 10 to 12, you're going to work on your resume, do some job searching, whatever, so that there is a routine and you have the structure. Otherwise, you end up frittering away. all
So
day thinking about you probably what you need to do.
I'm agreeing with you. However, you're using the word structure. And one of the things that people aren't aware of, you're using the word structure as if it's the routine and stuff. What I'm saying is you're there because you're talking to people about what you're doing. So in other words, the environment that you're in is you're collaborating with people. That's the accommodation that we're talking about that's hidden in plain sight. When you're home,
Collaboration.
there's nobody to collaborate on what you're not talking through your day. When you're at work, they're everywhere and you're doing it. So it's not necessarily the physical stuff that we're seeing, it's the intangible accommodations that we're talking about. And I know this, when lockdown hit, I'm an ADHD coach. I'm not cheap. I'm out of business in 60 days because I'm a luxury. No, my phone lit up like a Christmas tree. My waiting list was 15 people deep and you had to pay to be on it. Why? Because everybody was sent home to think in mind. So they were complaining, I have motivation problems. No, you don't have motivation problems. You lost your accommodation of the impairment, right?
Yes, being able to
You're not
talk.
out of that.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden, what I'm describing is starting to explain really vividly all kinds of things that we didn't necessarily know. And so the structure thing that you're talking about is there, but people put a lot of emphasis on the routine and the scheduling, not the fact that you're talking with somebody, which is what's actually enabling you to get some things done. And so when you begin to understand that and you accept that you have it, it's not so much I got to have a routine in the morning. It's if I had somebody I could talk through my day with in the morning, I could do that. It
Yes.
also explains, I've coached a number of people that struggle later in life with ADHD. And I'm like, well, because you were married, you had a partner, and you had kids that you were talking to. Now the kids have gone and you're divorced and you're home all by yourself and there's nobody built in for you to talk out loud with. That's why you're having a hard time, is because the accommodation was built in invisibly into your world. Now it's not. And that's why you're struggling, if that makes sense.
And I'm going to point out one thing, and that makes perfect sense in terms of there are fewer people right there with you to
Yes.
talk over and get
Yes.
that, well, gee, you're going to do this. How long? Where do you need to go?
Yes.
And one of
100%.
the things I can see if we're looking at, okay, an accommodation at work, and I can almost hear people in the workplace, the managers, the HR, well, in this open office, which is for collaboration. Wait a minute, there's this room with 20 desks, no separation between them. The guy next to you who has a loud voice and he's usually on the phone, but he talks better if he's probably thinks better if he's standing up. So, and if he's facing you, there's this loud voice talking about ideas and other stuff that doesn't apply to what you're doing. But people with ADD can't not pay attention to a conversation right there, especially if it's right in your ear. And then there are two other people walking by and talking, and the person behind you is chewing gum, and that you can't talk to the guy you're trying to exchange ideas and talk about your time when there's all this other stuff going on. And I think people, neurotypicals, would have a hard time with that. And so
So
that's where, okay, let's go to a meeting room. Let's go somewhere you can talk without all those competing
so the
sensory
kind of
things.
ergonomics from the inside out model actually, I'm not going to get a lot into, actually addresses that in specific detail as it relates to executive functions to bring tangibility. It's just not like they're crawling out of their skin. For some people, it's actually helpful. And then for other people, oddly enough, being in a room where there's a lot of stuff that's going on, like a lot of people moving around, that's not paying attention to them, like a Starbucks or a busy airport.
Yeah.
Sometimes people can actually get more done in that moment. I won't get into the details, but there's a executive function reason why that takes place for some of them. But and I don't want to overwhelm everybody with this a lot, but I'm so grateful that you're allowing me to come on to talk about this, because we now have this model. I'm going to say the technology. Dr. Barkley's definition, attention scope to make factual observations. We're revealing accommodations that are hidden in plain sight. We're bringing tangibility to them, because at the end of the day, Imagine if you could at work be afforded the ability to work with somebody where they're there asking you questions to help you problem solve, like like me asking the guy about the Mother's Day card, or you're asking these other people stuff like that. You're no longer having to brute force your way through this. You're just getting the accommodation to mitigate the disability. Just like reading with my glasses, I have the accommodation, I'm mitigating my impairment in an easy, natural way. And again, I go back to before, when I was describing trying to read without my glasses, the anxiety and the depression that I would have trying to compete with everybody else, right? If we were able to provide you the accommodations, my hypothesis is anxiety would go down and depression would go down, because as my mom has said, success solves a lot of problems, right? And so
Yes. And
it's interesting how this all flows downhill.
one kind of to build on the idea of having someone to talk to, and this was a patient I was talking to just yesterday. His company had restructured or reorganized such that the person who is his manager and who he could talk with, he said, I lost my Watson. I said, what do you mean? Well, Sherlock Holmes tries to solve problems. If he talked with Watson, he either got a reaction and he told Watson, no, that's crazy, or, oh, well, yeah, someone to bounce the ideas off of. So we need a Watson or a rubber duck, and well,
And
Watson's going to work better.
let's one of the issues here too that I'm doing with this thing is people have this stigma that they shouldn't need help. And so what you just described is great, but let's go a little bit further. And again, this is, I don't want to represent this as scientific fact, schedule fact. This is just my observations, but I've seen some documentaries on Einstein and Steve Jobs and some other, they come to mind. But what's interesting to me was how all those people would walk with other people and they talk. So Einstein would walk with Mileva, which wasn't his wife, I think is his cousin or something like that, all the time. And I remember watching a documentary with Steve Jobs, and some guy was going to see him. This is when he was dealing with recovery from pancreatic treatment the second time. And he was like, I'm going to something, like Steve was always going to go to walk. And sure enough, we're going to go to the park today. Because when you think about it, they walk and they're talking to somebody, they're collaborating with somebody. And I'm sharing this because these are people that are really, really, really bright, right? And they're doing it at the same level. Actually, I take that back. I believe that there's hypothesis both were ADHD. But imagine how our world could be if you got ADHD and it wasn't you were fighting for these accommodations. They were just known and they were provided to you. How much less stressful your life would be. That's what this is really all about. It's
And I
amazing.
think that's the important part, because people stumble into it by luck. Yes, this person's my manager, we get along, and they give me a perspective I hadn't thought of. Gee, can I come in and talk with you about this? And pretty soon that's a regular thing they're doing, but it's not a formal accommodation. They realized it helped, and the manager probably saw this person solving some problems that we hadn't been able to figure out, or he's doing great. But not everybody stumbles into the right situation. So
Or
this is
somebody, another issue is people are not, they're making biased observations and they're stuck in the fact that they don't have to do it as much. And they're actually looking negatively on this person and not actually seeing how much it's actually helping them to do that because they're blind. Again, the cool part about this ergonomics is we're using Dr. Barkley's model to define this, and we're putting people in experience. So even neurotypicals, the kitchen exercise, which by the way, let me tell you the story. This is fun. I was working with a couple one time, and the guy had ADHD, the woman didn't, but they had to do the kitchen exercise where they make the meal, et cetera, right? And I'm giving them the exercise, and the woman goes, well, I'll make breakfast. And I go, no, you got to make dinner. And it's got to not soup. I need 3, meat, potato, starch. She's like, Jeff, I'm busy. And she goes on, I said, stop. I said, first of all, you're paying money for me right now to understand this, but do you see that you're exhibiting ADHD behavior right now? She's like, what? I said, you're trying to get out of this. Like, and she was like, yes, because you already know that it's going to be difficult and you're busy and you don't want to stop and take the time to do this. If you want, and she was like, I know you're doing it right now. And so some people I can put in these experiences and they go, whatever. But some people that are self-aware, I can actually simulate it where they go, oh, that's what this is like. Yeah. Having to stop and use your less dominant hand every second this exercise. Could you imagine doing that for everything for the rest of your life? Oh my
That's the
God, it would
thing
wear
that
you out.
people don't
So
understand, that with ADHD, we don't, okay, that's over. It's 4 o'clock. I don't need to do that anymore. No, we wake up with it and it's there until go to bed, or we put off going to bed because there's something else they're doing. Um, and
so
I think that's excellent. You have to
so
make the meal with your non-dominant
yeah.
hand all the time.
So at the end of the day, we favor tangible things like extra time on tests and noise canceling headphones. And I'm not going to deny that. But all too often, what's really going on when people say structure is you're in and among people and they're there helping you solve problems. That's the second tier. That's the part. So we're bringing credibility to that. And I do want to share something here in a second to the subtleties of it. That's what's kind of really working. That's what this is vetting out. That's what this is being credibility. And that's why I'm excited. So I also want to tell you another story, because sometimes you're in a room with somebody and it doesn't seem like a lot's happening. So right before lockdown, I was working with this woman and I said, I want you to go out and notice what you're putting off. And I want you to recognize what is unclear. Of course, she starts to argue with me. I'm not doing it because of fear. Like, no, seriously, you'll do it, whatever. Then lockdown hits. And then one day I get an, oh my God, text. So I call her up and I go, what's up? She goes, I get it. I go, what do you mean? Well, I'm sitting at my desk because of lockdown on my computer and I'm doing this thing and there's a procedural thing that I forget what I'm supposed to do. I realize that happens at work sometimes and I lean over to my coworker. I ask them, they know I'm right back to work. 2 seconds happens so fast. I don't even notice it. Not today. There's nobody for me to lean over and see. So I instant message them. Of course, I don't know if they're at their desk. I don't know if they're looking at instant message. I sat there for a couple minutes. I went to go get a cup of coffee and I never went back. So we talked about it, and there's no question that the answer to that procedure was somewhere on the company's intranet, but she had absolutely no idea where it was. And so my point of this is sometimes go like, I hardly ever talk to people. Sometimes it's just being able to lean over and ask a question with it. Like, have you ever been online and you're trying to fill out an application and there's something that you don't know what it is? If you looked over at somebody and says, how do you interpret that? That can be the difference between you getting it done or not. And that is an invisible type thing that happens far more than most people realize. That goes back to that ambiguity, which goes back to this whole thing. Having people around to help you solve problems is really an accommodation. And if we were to provide it, it will increase safety, reduce stress, and increase productivity. And I argue that it's not going to be as expensive as people would realize, because they're already rubber ducking. They already have Watson. They've already going to do this stuff already. We're just not making them fight so hard to get it.
And I'm looking at kind of the other side of this. And one of the things that my patients who are managers, they have to deal with interruptions. And even if they have a separate room, people walk in the door, or they're at a desk, and yes, it's not in the middle of everything, but someone's asking, well, what could I do about this? How do I look at that? So they're being asked without boundary to be someone else's rubber duck. And I'm saying, okay, set some boundaries around things. If you're going to come and ask me a question, you have to have at least one solution that you think
so
about.
if I may, this is getting a little bit deeper, but in cognitive ergonomics, we break down the process of thinking. And so when you've got to sit down and deal with a problem, the first thing you have to do is familiarize yourself with all the relevant information. That's cognitively
where
difficult.
the person who's the manager with ADD, they've been working on one thing. Now they have to switch gears, familiarize themselves, think of
Well, yeah, yeah.
how
If
this
I may,
works,
I want to
and
interrupt you
then
because I want to come
answer
back.
back to their own.
I want to
Go
give a
ahead.
metaphor to come back to where that disruption is. So if you understand that you have to familiarize yourself with all the relevant information, by the way, this is effortful. People say, I'm having a hard time getting in the flow. When I'm getting the flow, I'm good. This is what we're talking about. Okay. A computer's a great metaphor. When you turn it on, the operating system has to boot up. All the tools have to get ready before you can do the work. You have to familiarize yourself with all that information before you do the work. If your computer is booted up and you're doing some work and it gets unplugged and the screen goes blank, you got to go through all that process again. What cognitive ergonomics is defining is when you're in the flow and you're there and somebody comes in and interrupts you, it's like everything gets wiped from your computer and you have to restart it all over. And getting into the flow is cognitively difficult. It's really, really, really hard. And so I tell people, like, have you ever noticed that you're at the dining room table and you're in the flow and it's your significant other walks in and says, "Hey, Dr. Pomeroy," and you're snarky at them. I go, you're doing that because they're threatening you, right? To stop and forget what you're doing, and you'll have to start over. So you're having a reflexive reaction to fight back because it took a lot of energy for you to get there. So again, this is just a small thing that cognitive ergonomics is defining and making tangible. So now we can go to the workplace and say, if somebody's walking in, your head's down, pencils down, you can't interrupt that person at that point in time. You're going to have to come back because if you don't let them finish what they're doing, they're going to have to start all over. And by the way, this works for neurotypicals. It's just a continuum at what point in time. So again, we have a language right now to describe exactly what you're saying, but we can relate it tangibly to a computer. We have a better understanding of what's going on. And now we can understand why you get frustrated because of that. And now we can begin to understand is like, hey, when the sign's up and the door is closed, I can't be interrupted because it's unproductive for me to start over again.
And right. And that's where the boundary is.
Yep.
And one accommodation, okay, it's called that way because that's what the company wants to call it, is it's okay for you to set aside on your schedule. Impossible for someone else to schedule a meeting in there.
And here, I interrupted you because I wanted you to understand what you were saying was legitimate. But now I've got a way of languaging it and explain it to somebody that makes some sense. So now I'm giving you the power to say, no, this is what it is. And
this is why.
Yeah. And it's legitimate. So, because a lot of times you have ADHD, everybody you're fighting and you're feeling wrong. I'm legitimately explaining this is what the impairment is, this is why it's working. So it's not just I'm establishing the boundaries and I'm giving you evidence as to why it is what it is. It's so much easier to ask for those accommodations when you can name it, explain it, and articulate it in a way that everybody can get.
Specific. And when I'm writing a letter to or filling out the accommodations forms that and people, it says what are the symptoms and what do they do with the function and what's the impairment and that's what's the accommodation. And so I've not had the words to be able to explain it other than this is the way someone's brain works and there's the functional MRI, etc. But to be able to say, if you're working and your computer suddenly shuts down, you've had your work interrupted, you have to go back through all the steps to get it going, but then it takes you some time to put your thoughts into where you already were. And that, I think, you get the practical example.
And again, forgive this starts to splinter off because now you, with cognitive ergonomics and understand these principles, you can take a look at behavior and understand what it is. So I got these people with ADHD, I'm a night owl, I'm up late doing stuff, or I'm up early in the morning. Well, why? Because during the day, you're doing your projects at night in the morning where you need uninterrupted time, where you're in the flow and nobody's going to interrupt you. If you do it in the middle of the day, you're constantly bombarded. You can't do it. The only time you can do it is at night. And that's why you do it at night, because you're rewarded with higher levels of performance. If you begin to understand this, right, you can sit there and go, maybe I can do it during the day, but the only way that's going to happen is if I shut the world off, because I can't be interrupted, because the legitimate reason. So again, what's so cool about this, it begins to validate almost everything that you do for a legitimate reason. Then like I've had people before like, but I don't want to work after hours. I'm like, well, this is what you're going to have to do to work, because it's environmentally, like, it's not just you're going to do it, it's you have to block it off and recreate that environment. It will work if you do that. Oh, but I can't. Okay, well, I'm explaining why it's not going to work. And a lot of times just understanding the logic behind it, the mechanical logic, takes away the emotional response. It's not that you're bad. It's just, this is the way my brain works. This is the way I do it. And if I did it a different way, and so we can begin to problem solve, not just try to get you to harder. That's what it's all about.
Make it real.
Yes.
And easy for the HR person that's looking this, or your manager has to approve it, whatever, so they can understand, instead of just the concept of my brain works better if, to be able to say, I need to be able to put those things together. And it helps me in the beginning of the day to talk it over to someone and they may say, you're not going to be able to get all that stuff done today. Let's start with the first two. How are you going to do that? What program are you going to use? Where are you going to look? So it's working that through, and we've got to work through the fact that we could probably keep talking for 2 hours. And
yeah, well, I do want to. I know we have to bring this to an end, but I got to tell you something. From the first time I talked to you about it, right now, I'm watching your face, and I'm having the greatest time, and I'm waiting for you to tell me about the first time that somebody's asking you for accommodations, and you're going to say rubber ducking and Watson.
Yes. Ask the manager, have you read Sherlock Holmes or watched those things happening? That's what we're talking about.
Yes.
Yeah, I think, and if it's an engineer, software engineer, mechanical engineer, and I say he needs some rubber ducking. Oh, okay, well, that's what we'll do. That'll get him right where he needs to be. Well, folks, it's been great to have Jeff Copper here and talking about his new paradigm of how we look at language and using language, and our need to use language as a way of problem solving. And there are a lot of good analogies, a lot of good examples of how to do that. And when Jeff told me about the make a meal with your non-dominant hand, I asked him, can I put the Band-Aid on with my dominant hand? He said, no, because that's where the cut's going to be. And so I hope you've enjoyed the show. It's been great, Jeff, having you here. And come back next time and we'll have some more interesting folks.
Thanks for the opportunity. I appreciate you letting me come on and share this with everybody. It's really exciting. Thank you.